Time is it?
So I think it's 8:50, no?
I don't know. It just says on.
Yeah, it goes on and on. It has a mind of its own. 8:51.
All right. Disappear.
If you talk, maybe it'll come back on. No,
No, I don't think so.
with the cold, I think everything's not working. Maybe it'll come back on again. I don't know what.
Before.
Yeah.
All right. Whatever. Good morning, everybody, on this brisk, chilly day. I think it was 7 degrees when I left the house this morning. The topic of Kaddish and yard sites is something that people are familiar with, but may not necessarily know the origins, history of. And I want to speak about one particular type of Kaddish, but let me give a little background to what Kaddish, different types of Kaddish. Initially, Kaddish is part of davening. There are different types of Kaddish in davening. There's a Chasi Kaddish and a Kaddish Sholem, which differentiates different parts of the tefillah. Different parts of Shacharis are separated. When different parts are concluded, there's a Kaddish in between, either a half Kaddish or a full Kaddish. Okay. Then you also have a Kaddish D'Rabbanan, which is recited after learning. And the Kaddish D'Rabbanan is probably the oldest form of Kaddish after the Kaddish in davening. The Kaddish in davening was always part of davening, had nothing to do with death or memorializing somebody who has died. It's part of davening. And the Kaddish D'Rabbanan was recited after learning, usually Divrei Agadata, but that was an older Kaddish. And then you have something called the Kaddish Ischadata, which is a very strange Kaddish. It's the Kaddish that is recited at the gravesite, at a funeral. And it's interesting that the Kaddish that's recited at the gravesite is the exact same Kaddish that's recited at a Shiur. And I have yet to figure out the connection. If somebody can figure out what the connection is, I'd love to hear it. But the Kaddish at a Shiur, which is late, it's a late Kaddish. I mean, its origin is late. And the Kaddish, I said at the gravesite, are the same. Okay. These are the Kaddishes that people are most familiar with. The Kaddish Yoso, the mourner's Kaddish, as it's called, is a late innovation. The Kaddish Yoso, even though midrashically it might be attributed to Rabbi Akiva in a very late medrash, the practice of saying Kaddish by an orphan for a parent or a child for a parent came about probably in the aftermath of the Crusades. And that was when it was infused with all types of Kabbalistic intentions, not really part of the original Kaddish. We'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of the cultural milieu in which this grew up. You have to understand that even though there's tremendous anti-Semitism throughout Europe, the Christian community and the Jewish community, I wouldn't say lived in harmony, but they lived next to each other in all the cities and communities in Europe. And there's a lot of cultural transmission. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. It's definitely true that the church took many, many, many things from Judaism. As Rabbi Yudin always says, we had it first, and they took many, many things. They changed it to Christianize it, but they took many things from Judaism. But the passageway goes both ways, as we'll see in a moment. Yeah.
What I found very amusing yesterday, watch this whole thing from, they had the benediction.
Yes.
After they ate.
He did the benediction.
It said, standing up, we went through some of everything
Yeah, but there's also the Christian concept of saying grace before you eat.
Right, but that they say sitting down.
Yes.
The benediction is done standing up.
Okay.
Our benediction is done sitting down.
Sitting down, okay, but that's also Jewish, because when you say Shem Hashem in Davar Shebekdusha, you have to be Amida. There are certain parts of davening you have to stand for. Things that require dominion, so whatever. So there's a lot of transmigration back and forth. So where did all this begin? First of all, the word Yortzeit. It's probably the most popular German word in the American language. It's not Yiddish, it's German. Yortzeit is part of the German culture, and German is a language that was spoken in many, many countries in Europe. And that word is something that I want to investigate. Initially, when Kaddish was said, and again, following the Crusades, with many, many, many communities were decimated, and people that had more bicher, they used to recite long lists of names of people that were killed during the Isker service that also began at that time. But the notion of commemorating the death of a person is fraught with many, many different concepts. I want to try to break it down for you. We understand Kaddish Yosef, the mourner's Kaddish. Theoretically, a person's parent died, you say Kaddish for that person for 11 months. Why 11 months? A very famous concept, because there's a Mishnah in Adios, I think, the second paragraph of Adios, not the most popular Masechta, which says that Mishpat Rishoyim Begehenim Yud Beis Chodesh, that the judgment of Rishoyim, however you want to define a Russia, in Gehenim, whatever Gehenim might be, lasts for 12 months. So in order not to say that our parents are Rishoyim, the custom arose only to say Kaddish for 11 months. Okay. Again, initially, only one person said Kaddish in Shul. You had all the mourners got together, and they took turns. And at the end of davening, after Oleinu, which was the only time they would say Kaddish, at the end of davening, at the end of Oleinu, they would take turns. One person would say Kaddish, and that was it. And they would take. Now, the Mishnah Berurah mentions that unfortunately, fights began to break out. Oh, I want to say no, it's my turn. And then so everybody began to say Kaddish together. There are still places where only one person says Kaddish. There are still individuals in Washington Heights. In the early years of our Hashkama Minyan, we had two brothers, the Bacon brothers. And when their father passed away, Josh Bacon said Kaddish the way everybody says Kaddish. Stephen was held by the custom, only one person says Kaddish. So he, throughout the entire year of saying Kaddish, he rarely had to say Kaddish because there was always somebody else saying Kaddish. He didn't say Kaddish. Only one person says Kaddish. That's enough. Okay. When I was growing up, and this is what prompted this whole discussion this morning, when I was growing up at the Inwood Jewish Center, which is a shul of mostly European, mostly Polish immigrants, a lot of European customs, which most shuls don't have anymore today. We said all the krovets, and we said all the extra Yom Li'abosha, all the extra additions that you have in your machzor, which nobody says anymore. We used to say them all. One of the things I remember from my childhood is that every so often during the weekday davening, after Oleinu, after the Shir Shel Yom, the Gabbai would shout out, Yortzeit, and the one person who had Yortzeit that day would say Kaddish by himself. I haven't seen that in any other shul, but apparently it's a long entrenched custom that again, going back to the initial practice of people only one person saying Kaddish, a person who had Yortzeit was given the privilege of saying Kaddish by himself. They would say Kapitel Chaf Gimel of Tehillim, and then that one person would say Kaddish by himself. Okay, I mean,
Most schools that I
Good. Okay, but it existed, and I'm sure it existed in other places too. And of course, followed by whiskey and bow ties afterwards. Yeah.
Is the chiyuv to daven and say Kaddish related to each other, or the two
Okay.
separate chiyuv?
There's no, okay, the language is very important. There's no chiyuv. The whole business of Kaddish and all the things that grew up around it is all custom. It's all minhag. We're trying to understand the halacha of a minhag.
But we say the other people are saying Kaddish and
The notion of davening for the Omid on a yard site, and these are all customs. And I'll try to explain where that comes from. Yeah.
So if it's just a minhag,
Uh-huh.
I shouldn't say just a minhag. Some, it's like you find out years later after you grew up, somebody that you thought they had not really related to. So like minhaging, or sometimes you think it's a lot.
That's right.
Where's then, if it's quote only a minhag, where's the whole thing that you can't say Kaddish unless you're 10?
Well, because Kaddish, all right, good question. Where does it come from? So first of all, number one, it is a minhag. It's a very strong minhag. It has achieved tremendous popularity. There are people who are not observant in any other way, but they'll insist on saying Kaddish, and they'll come to shul. They never went to shul before. This is all the strength of a minhag, and it assumes a life of its own. But the word Kaddish, whether it's the Kaddish, the Rabbanon, Kaddish, the Ischad, any type of a Kaddish is called a Dover Shebek Dusha. And a Dover Shebek Dusha requires a minyan. So you can't say Kaddish without a minyan, and that's where that, because again, it's considered, again, before this minhag even arose, you didn't have Kaddish. People davened and they mourned the loss of a parent, but then again, the mystical impact on Jewish life can't be underestimated. Even the Mishnah Brura, who was not regarded as a Kabbalist, quote unquote, quotes the Zohar over 400 times the Mishnah Brura. So Jewish mysticism had a tremendous influence over our halakhic practices. A lot of things that we do today is based on the Kabbalah, without getting into details about it. The minhag, but I want to get into this yard site minhag, why it's somewhat problematic. Yeah.
Why do most schools insist that somebody say Kaddish after later, even if they're not monks?
Okay, because that's a separate, because that's a separate halach. That Kaddish should be recited at least once in the morning after davening. It's a separate halach that after Aleinu, Kaddish should be recited, whether there's a mourner there or not. That's a separate halach.
That's a halacha or minhag?
That's it's quoted by the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch. Now again, is this strictly based on a halachic premise, or simply a custom that arose? And that's very hard to pin down. Very hard to pin down. The earliest mention of Kaddish, it didn't come about, really until the 14th, 15th century in Sefer Maharil and other Sfarim about dealt with minhagim. Yeah.
Sometimes there'll be a person that will say certain congregation and not others within the same God. Can you explain that? Why they pick certain ones?
That's personal, preferences or minhagim. We have somebody in our shul that says Kaddish D'Rabbanan every morning. That's all he says. Maybe he's doing it for somebody that, I don't know. That's there's no how. Again, it's very difficult to plumb the halachos of minhagim. They're all rituals of different geographic areas. This business of, again, for a yard site to say Kaddish exists in some places, not in other places, to say by himself. It's important to understand the impact of the Kabbalah in all of this. The Kabbalah taught, and it's quite possible, and I won't go into too many details about it, that this is an example of interreligious borrowing. The church was very, very concerned about death and hell and purgatory and all that kind of stuff. And many things in the church service were introduced, prayers were introduced, paternoster and other things to commemorate the person's passage from life into the next world. And a lot of things that we do are very, very similar. I won't go into details, but there's a lot of, what do they call it? There's a German expression for this. No, what is it? I have it here someplace. Can't find it, but I'm looking for it. All right, but there's a German expression for Frömmkeit, German, of religious concepts that were borrowed one from the other. As I say, they lived in close proximity and they were aware of their customs and they borrowed from each other. Put that on the side for a moment. But in Kabbalistic thought, a person dies and he goes into this some type of nether world in between heaven and hell, during which time he's judged. And as I mentioned, we only did say Kaddish for 11 months, so we don't consider him a Rasha whose judgment lasts for 12 months. And then after that, he goes higher and higher in whatever levels of sanctity and Kedusha or whatever position he might occupy in the next world. And the belief is, again, based on Kabbalistic teaching, that anything that we can do to elevate the soul of the departed is a positive thing. That's why we wish people, neshama should have an aliyah. We're not calling him to the Torah, but neshama should have an aliyah simply means he should get to a higher position in Gan Eden, assuming he's in Gan Eden. Or if he's not in Gan Eden, he should get out of wherever he is. These are common in Christianity and in Judaism. The problem with that is, if we're saying Kaddish on a yard site, it somehow goes against the notion that a person is only in the purgatory stage for 11 months. It's somewhat contradictory. So the yard site Kaddish seems to be accepted as the main concept among many, many Jewish communities. It wasn't universally accepted. In the beginning, there were poskim who were opposed to the yard site Kaddish because we don't want to claim to take him out of where he is to, he's in Gan Eden already. We don't assume he's in purgatory, in an intermediate stage. So initially, the elevation of the souls of the tzaddikim from one level to the next became permeated into Jewish thought, and that's where the yard site Kaddish comes into. Yeah.
Aren't there stages in Gan Eden also that contain higher levels?
Yes. Here's the expression. I'll come back. The expression I was looking for is Volksfrömmigkeit, the piety of the common people. That was a German expression, Volksfrömmigkeit, or Frömmigkeit. We assume that people are tzaddikim and they're going to higher and higher levels in Gan Eden. And that's why we say Kaddish on a yard site. That's why we drink a l'chaim for an aliyas neshama. We do all these, but these are all customs. And it came about from this whole notion of the Kabbalistic concept of being elevated. The neshama should have an aliyah. They should go higher. This is pure Kabbalistic thought. It doesn't, in the classic poskim, they don't discuss it in great detail. In the halachic literature, it's mentioned that it's a minhag, that some people say Kaddish to commemorate the yard site. It was not universally accepted. Bear that in mind, because we hope people went straight to Gan Eden after the 11 months. They're in Gan Eden, and the yard site was not commemorated until very, very late. That didn't become a thing. And then people began to say Kaddish on a yard site. And the way you justify it was that we're going to elevate the neshama to even a higher level. And that became accepted and normative, but this was very similar to what went on in Christian doctrine, where they also did many, many rituals to elevate the soul from higher levels in heaven or whatever. Yeah.
No disrespect to any rabbis or whoever taught this. However, based on his life, are we talking about levels in Gan Eden? I mean, that you would think that once someone has passed on, that there's some kind of equality between, and it's like, it's still a competition, even when you're dead.
You're right, absolutely.
And I think that, again, with all due respect to the Rabbi, I think that's horrendous. Someone has died, and as long as they're a quote, regular person, not a murderer or something like that, how do we even know that there are levels in God?
Okay, very good question. Since nobody that we know has come back and told us about it, we have to rely, and yet this is not in the realm of pure halacha. This is in the realm of mystical thought. I won't be so bold as to call it speculation, but people who are deep into Kabbalah has very many secret teachings that have very ancient sources. And as I said, all of this stuff, Kaddish itself, and all the customs that grew up around it. And we'll talk about the yahrzeit candle tomorrow. But all the things that grew up around Kaddish and mourning practices are all in the realm of Kabbalistic thought. And those who are into Kabbalah have perhaps entree into certain knowledge that the average person does not have. And I'm certainly not in a position to understand it or question it. The way it's come down to us, based on the teachings of very, very prominent Rabbanim who were poskim as well as Kabbalists, this became normative Jewish practice. Based, much of what we do in today is based on Kabbalah. The whole business of Birchas Kohanim, the way we do Birchas Kohanim, the parts of davening that we say, all based on Kabbalistic thought. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, was a renowned Kabbalist. Now, his Kabbalistic works aren't studied as much as the Shulchan Aruch is studied, but it was based on Kabbalistic thought. He was a Kabbalist, a very important one. And he has, among his svarim that are not usually studied, there's a sefer called Magid Meisharim. Very important sefer, where he discusses his conversations with a malach. Now, if you can understand that, more power to you. But it's a whole sefer about the conversations that he had and the revelations of secret knowledge that he observed. There's a lot of stuff that we don't understand that became normative practice. We do it because our parents did it and our grandparents did it, and this is Jewish life today. But if you, there's a very important sefer called Safra Ditzniusa, the hidden book, originally supposedly written by Yaakov Avinu. Originally. And there's an introduction to the Safra Ditzniusa written by a student of the Vilna Gaon. And a Rebbe of mine once mentioned it, so I went to the library to find the sefer. I found it, opened it up, and the only words that I could figure out were chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Other than that, I had no clue what it was talking about. All in Aramaic. Well, in the introduction to it, interestingly enough, he talks about the Vilna Gaon making a golem before he was bar mitzvah, among other things. It's fascinating. But in any event, so the questions are legitimate questions, but what is it based on? It's based on the Kabbalah. That's all I can tell you. And more than that, the notion that we've accepted is that people ascend to higher and higher levels in Gan Eden each year that you recite a Kaddish on a yahrzeit. And this gave rise to the custom that when a person has a yahrzeit, he has the schus of saying Kaddish by himself, which goes back to the original custom of every Kaddish being said by only one person. But again, what we do today in 2025 was practically the same as what was done in 1825 or 1725. But if you go back to 1325 or 1245, it didn't happen. They had that, it was in the beginning stages when it was first developing. And the Kabbalah, there's different types of Kabbalah. There's Ashkenazic Kabbalah, there's Sephardic Kabbalah. A lot of it grew up in the aftermath of the Crusades or the Rindfleisch massacres or the Spanish expulsions, especially. The Kabbalah of the Ari was developed as a result of the Spanish expulsion. And then you have the Kabbalah of the Ashkenazic Kabbalists that rose after the Crusades. Different in many, many ways. But the influence of the Kabbalah cannot be underestimated. And it is the primary reason that we say Kaddish today. Because originally, as I say, Kaddish simply proclaimed the majesty of Hashem. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbi. His name is to be magnified and glorified. That's all it is. And then it became interpreted, well, so we accept God's judgment that a person died, and it makes us feel better by praising God and not dwelling on the negative that the person died. And you could give all kinds of interpretations of the Kaddish. But ultimately, it's a praise of God. Death is not mentioned anywhere in Kaddish at all. It has nothing to do with death. All it has to do with is praising Hashem. That's all it is. It's all Kaddish is. So you can interpret it by praising Hashem, so you're accepting God's judgment. Okay, that makes you feel better, good. But ultimately, it's a minhag. And the halachas of minhagim are widespread. We can't explain it through Jewish culture alone, because these yahrzeit customs developed in Christian lands, not so much in the Islamic world, interestingly enough. But it was reinterpreted based on Kabbalistic teaching, and it became part of Jewish life today. Tomorrow, we will explore the whole notion of the yahrzeit candle, where that came from, how important it is. It's again, anything that has to do with these type of customs, I find very fascinating, because it teaches us that, number one, halacha is not pure legalistic teachings. It's based on many, many other concepts that feed into it. Yes, Andy.
Yeah, I don't know if I heard correctly, but what you see common point, see them, and you say that Kaddish versus very someone.
Right.
Starting to speak to see them. What was it originated? Who originated? What was the reason that they originated? Because we know we make a see them over someone died, right?
Where's that come from?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying.
All right, so all of this, whatever we could do, mimalamed schus, to help elevate that neshama, we do. So we say Kaddish, we learn, we say Tehillim, whatever we can do in memory of the departed is believed to help them achieve higher levels in Gan Eden, whatever that means.
What I'm saying is, if the person that to see him did it for that reason, that there's a relationship between Kaddish that you say, I see him,
okay, but
Kaddish that you say, I death, because they're related to the person.
Maybe,
that died.
okay, so
That's the question I said. Who was the one that originated? What was the why? I don't know, I'm just asking.
The origins of when specifically this became mainstream halachic practice are very difficult to determine. It's mentioned in different Sifrei Minhagim going back. The earliest mention is probably the 15th century.
And the other point I wanted to make was, so I say the Kaddish on the good side, you could never make the Shabbat with your parents, right, all year, just to discuss of that. in their
There's no
head
question.
and do things that follows.
There is
When
no.
you're on the court, just make sure you do the same thing.
You're making a very good point. Living a proper Jewish life is the best way to honor your parents. No question about it. Yet, Afal Pikein Vilam Rot HaKol, people who are not necessarily observant think that the Kaddish is the most important thing in Jewish life. And that's why people who don't do anything will come to shul for a year following the death of a parent to say Kaddish. Sometimes they continue coming, sometimes they become more observant. Wonderful. Doesn't always happen. People just drop in for that year to say Kaddish, but I think that's more important than anything else. That is the power of the minhag in Jewish life. Yes.
Kaddish that's done by a funeral, by a scene. I think when by a funeral, you're putting somebody to rest. And when you make a scene, it's very similar, putting that person to rest. And slowly introducing yourself.
Okay.
The suit doesn't have to be a person like that.
What's that?
You can make a suit anytime you want. That would be related to
Yeah, you can make a siyum anytime you want. That's correct. But every time you make a siyum, it could also be a malamed skus for someone who's passed away. These are all, but again, understand the framework in which we're thinking. We're thinking in 2025, after hundreds of years of being indoctrinated as to the importance of Kaddish and why we say Kaddish, which initially had nothing to do with what we think it does. Yeah.
I mean, how people who are standing, some people stand for Kaddish, other people who won't stand for Kaddish. How did that?
Okay, why do you stand? So as I explained before, the halacha would require us for all dvarim shebekdusha, things that require a minyan, require amida. That would be Kaddish, Baruchu, Kedusha. Anything that requires a minyan is done by amida. This is the normative Ashkenazic practice. The Talmidei Ha'ari, the great Spanish Kabbalist, would sit during Kaddish, which is why Sephardim sit during Kaddish and Ashkenazim stand.
And there's no difference between Kaddish and this Kaddish Shalom, Kaddish Yosef.
No difference. They sit for Kaddish. I don't know the basis of this in the Ari's system, but I remember once I had a young man staying with us who was Syrian, and he came to shul, and people were saying Kaddish, and everybody stood up, and he sat. And I asked him, why? He said to stand for Kaddish. He said, no, we sit. And he brought me all the Mari Makomos from the Ari and Sephardic postscript that they sit for Kaddish. Different minhagim. What's that? But tefillin sitting down too. That's correct. Yes.
If they're standing when Kaddish starts, they don't sit down.
Okay, but most Sephardim sit during Kaddish. They sit. They're putting on the tefillin. It's based on the teachings of the Ari, and that became. Now the Ari was a very, very important figure in Jewish thought, and his teachings, especially of his students, who recorded his teachings, became pretty much normative practice in the Sephardic world, and a lot of it crept over into the Ashkenazic world as well. But the influence of Kabbalah on halakha and Jewish practice should not be minimized. It became very, very important, especially unfortunately, the Jewish community lived through many, many periods of crisis and terrible persecutions. And the only way they could survive it is through the influence of the Kabbalah, which taught about the world to come and a better place to be and so forth. That gave them something to live through. And that may explain why there's so much reliance on it, because otherwise everything is pretty bleak. And this gave them a little bit of hope. Now, maybe, I'm not saying that was the origin of Kabbalistic teaching, but Kabbalah is a whole separate field all by itself. We can't go into it, although I'd love to at some point, but it's not for everybody. And there are a lot of fascinating concepts in Kabbalah, many of which have come down to us in our practical observance of Jewish law. But anyhow, so the Yortzeit Kaddish evolved, shall I say, from different sources. Although it is not common, I have not seen it recently, where anybody who has a Yortzeit has the right to say Kaddish by himself. We certainly don't do it in this shul. Most of the shuls that I've been in don't do that anymore. So people have, everybody says Kaddish together, whether they say standing in the front of the shul, they stay standing in the back of the shul. You very rarely find a place where only one person says Kaddish, maybe in some yeshivish circles, maybe, but they still want to do it properly. And I have not seen in the past 60 or 70 years that I can recall, I have not seen, except the shul where I grew up, where a person who has Yortzeit has a Kaddish all by himself at the end of davening. I have not seen that anywhere. And I don't know if it still exists. But anyway, that's the origin of Yortzeit Kaddish. Tomorrow we tackle the Yortzeit candle. Okay. Have a great day. Stay warm.
Stay warm. Thank you.
A great day. Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care, Janusz. Okay. We have a Levi to bench? Good. Yishem Adonai Baruch Me'atov Yad Olam. Rosh HaMishlot V'chayinu. Amen. Hey.
Thank you. David, just a cook. David, would you like a left today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
After.